The book is there, and the book is outside and ready for sale. We didn't actually realise it was going to be here today. It was due next week, but thankfully the printer managed to pull the stops out, so it literally turned up at Holborn Studios yesterday. So Janet was down there, I was down there, just packing bags and taking boxes. So it's here, 4 years, almost to the day after the first one. So thank you for anybody involved in the first one, because this one wouldn't be here. The success of the first one led to this one. So, International Women's Month, great time to launch a book about women from Hackney's history. And if you remember, it's not that they passed through it on a bus once. It has to be a bit more of a Hackney connection than that. Sometimes it's tempting, but no, I kept it. So, born, lived, worked, died, buried. And they all have to have passed. So, all of these women in this book are no longer with us, some more recently than others. So, ask me questions. I think I'll leave you some time at the end, I think. But if you've got a burning question that you think, oh my God, I'm never going to remember, just ask. Well, I'll try. So, International Women's Month 2025, and it says due March 2025. That's how quick they came, so I didn't have a chance to change the slide. So it's here. And members of the Hackney Society, £10. You can join the Hackney Society and get your £5 off. There you go. That's my bit of selling. I'm now going into the women, okay? So I thought for this particular talk, I'd concentrate on 3 women in particular who are linked to Shoreditch Town Hall. So those of you who have been on the tour will have heard at least about one of them. The other 2 performed here in some manner, but one of them was a major politician in Shoreditch. I'm not convinced she's ever actually left Shoreditch, by the way. She doesn't seem to have moved outside the borough boundaries ever in all her 90-odd years, so we'll see. So, that's Hetty. Did you hear about Hetty? Yeah, so Henrietta Girling. Now, she's born 1875 in what was then Finsbury. In our terms, just off Essex Road. So effectively Islington these days, but then the borough of Finsbury. So she's born near Packington Street. Her father is a metal polisher. She first comes to records when she's in the census as an artificial florist, age 15. So she's working quite young. But she and her husband, William, end up being called the mother and father of Hoxton, because between them, they had over 100 years of public service for Shoreditch Borough Council. And it was Shoreditch then, because Hetty took the opportunity in 1965 when the boroughs merged into modern day Hackney. So Shoreditch, Stoke Newington, Hackney itself merged together. She took the opportunity at that point, and she was past retirement age. She took the opportunity to retire at that point. So she was in service effectively for 52 years for Shoreditch. So mother and father of Hoxton, as I say, I don't have any record of her actually ever leaving the borough. I'm sure that's, I don't know. I haven't found any evidence. Anyway, so age 15, she's an artificial florist. Age 18, she marries Bill. 10 children later. They all still seem to have survived as well. 1909, she's a school manager, so she's working. Again, quite unusual for this period. First public role, 1913. Now, this, of course, is prime suffrage time. No evidence, one way or the other, whether she's ever involved in the suffrage campaign. Knowing what she did and knowing her politics, I would be surprised if she wasn't. But as I say, can't find anything one way or the other. So, 1913, Shoreditch Board of Guardians, that's where she appears, and that is the old workhouse being organised. So the workhouses lasted until about 1930. So that's her first public role, and it's quite common for women moving into local government to take that role as a first step. So there she is. 1919, she's elected as a local councillor. So clearly she's moving through. And this is the same year as Bill becomes mayor for the first time. I think he becomes mayor 4 times. It's an honorary role at that point. It's not a sort of political one like they are now. So Bill is mayor. I like to think she just didn't want that particular just standing by him role as mayoress. So she becomes a local councillor as well. That's me sort of assuming from everything else that I found out about her and her politics and all the work that she did. Doesn't strike me that she would be particularly happy just standing by him smiling in official photos. So while he's mayor, I'm making assumptions there. Right, so in 1921, and this is where you start getting that sort of contradiction. 1921, she becomes a Justice of the Peace. First one in Shoreditch, first female in Shoreditch to become a Justice of the Peace. And she's appointed to the Juvenile Court. She's always got a huge interest in young people's welfare. And this is a time when Shoreditch is a really progressive borough. 1930, so she does the Juvenile Court and she does the Licensing Committee. And there's some rather nice sort of stories about her that Shoreditch was always very accommodating with women actually going into pubs. Some other areas, no. Shoreditch was fine, but she apparently made a point of not going to the pubs. Her granddaughter seems to have assumed that was because she was a little bit grand. I actually think because she was on the Licensing Committee, she probably didn't want to get involved or be sort of harangued by your local publican about his licence. But again, it's something you can sort of read in, but no actual evidence that I can find. So 1930, big year, she becomes the first female mayor of Shoreditch. Her daughter Rosie acts as mayoress. So obviously Bill was not going to stand in as the supporting role there. And 1931, she becomes Shoreditch's representative on the London County Council. So sort of equivalent of the GLA today. So she's moved from pure local politics into a more London-wide. And again, that's fairly typical with the women working through local government. And she's given an OBE in 1937. And she's very, very proud of this, quite rightly. 37 is another year when she really comes to prominence because, anybody heard of William Joyce? Lord Haw, anyone? Yeah? Nazi propagandist, basically. He was local. I think he actually came from Clapton. I should be proud of that. I think he actually lived in Clarence Road at one point. 1937 London County Council election, she actually runs against him. So he's standing for, presumably, Oswald Mosley's British National Party. And this is the year after the Battle of Cable Street. So it's a really tense time. She calls him a dirty rat. Doesn't hold back on this. She calls him, yeah. And then no gentleman. Well, she's a bit more delicate, but essentially she doesn't like him very much. And there's lots of sort of stories about whether, and obviously this is sort of conspiracy theory gone a little wild here, but who knows? Who knows? Her street, and she, as I say, she always lived locally. She died in Minturn Street. There's a block of council flats there now, rather ironically overlooking Dorothy Thurtle Gardens. Yeah, Buckland Court. So she actually died in Buckland Court, but that area was bombed heavily during the Second World War. So you're right next to Shoreditch Park. Shoreditch Park was houses, absolutely obliterated in the bombing. And there were sort of some slightly sort of tongue-in-cheek things saying that they deliberately aimed at her because she was so nasty to William Joyce. Anyway, her home was bombed twice. That's enough, I think. And also, there's this rather nice story that you come across in the papers. Again, 10 children, lots and lots of grandchildren. One of her grandchildren was out one day during the Second World War, and he comes across William Joyce himself pasting up some Nazi posters close by the house. Again, is he doing this deliberately? And when the boy runs back to the house and gets someone to challenge William Joyce, apparently he tries to tip a paste pot over his head. So, you know, I suspect there's probably an element of truth in it. Possibly he found him posting up posters, but who knows about the paste over the head? It might just be a bit of local adding to the story a little, but still, there you go. And I would like to say, despite the fact that she's a JP, she's done all this stuff, in 1921 the census says home duties. You know, it says occupation. So there's Bill, London County Councillor, whatever. Home duties, which basically means she's a housewife. And in 1939, unpaid domestic duties. I don't know, it's like, Hetty, what's going on here? Why are you not? Because she seems to be very sort of proud, she's very sort of out there doing her job and making a difference, and she really, really does. But on these official forms, she's still saying, I'm a housewife. Possibly, I did think that, but then knowing what I know of Bill from reading around him, he's not the sort to do that. They were very much a partnership. Don't know. Again, it's one of those weird things you think, oh, come on, Hetty, really? But it was a different time. So yeah, so she's on the licensing committee, she's on the juvenile court with Cynthia Colville, who's also in the book, and Nettie Adler, who's in the first book. So there's a lot of very prominent women in Shoreditch at this time. Not so happy. New Year party, 1931. There's a story in the papers, and there's Bill and Hetty. And as you can read, she was kicked in a scuffle. There was apparently a rather nasty bunch of Hoxton lads. This is too early for my dad. I can't blame him. He was very much a Hoxton lad. So yeah, there was a fight at this New Year party, and she got kicked, and there were knives found, and it all blew up. This is what you get from reading the British newspaper archive. You find all these interesting little stories. Add a bit to what you know, because whenever I'm doing these bits of research, I'm trying to find the personality. You can have a whole list of things they did, but you're trying to find a personality, and sometimes it's quite difficult. And I've cut Herbert Morrison out of that picture. Not that I have anything particularly against Herbert Morrison. So he was the MP for Hackney, he was the Home Secretary, he was Deputy PM to Clem Attlee, for example, but he's over here. And this is Hetty in later life. So very much sort of part of the sort of Labour aristocracy by this point. Not so much as the Thurtalls, by the way. I mean, Dorothy Thurtall, as of Dorothy Thurtall Garden, she was the daughter of George Lansbury. So she's in the first book. She gets something named after her. Possibly, again, because she's of that Labour aristocracy, but they do recognise the Girlings very, very much. The comparison I will make with them, and I don't know if any of you know, I mean, she's in our book too because she does have a connection to Hackney, but the Salters in Bermondsey. So Alfred Salter? Yeah, Alfred Salter and Ada Salter. They were really big. I mean, you wrote Ada's story, and she's remarkable in a lot of ways. But again, it's a husband and wife, you know, working together to improve local conditions. I mean, Alfred Salter became an MP, so he sort of moved into national politics. But it's very much the same sort of thing. Salters in Bermondsey, the Girlings in Hoxton and Shoreditch. So as I say, she retired 1965, and I think she died about the age of 90. Her granddaughter, and in that book there, the Shoreditch Town Hall one, her granddaughter is quoted, and she does say how Aunt Hetty was quite grand. And apparently she wrote JP on the back of the family photos. So again, it sort of doesn't really go with the writing on the census housewife, does it? That, you know, she worked for the Public Assistance Committee after the war, so basically handing out money to those who needed it. And she actually apparently turned down her mother-in-law for one. So she really stuck to the rules, did Hetty. I can't imagine that caused a lot of happiness in her family. But she played a huge role in lowering the infant death rate around here. I mean, Hoxton was very, very poor. and she instituted mother and baby clinics, always sort of backed up places like open spaces and playgrounds for children. So really trying to improve the health of children around here. But Bill gets council flats on the Colville estate named after him, and a reservoir named after him. There is the Girling Reservoir. He was on the Metropolitan Waters Board as well, which is why, presumably. Hetty has nothing. I think that needs to change, doesn't it? So, yeah. A plaque, maybe. Yeah. Hetty Girling. Yeah. So, yeah, she really, really does need some recognition. The amount of work, apparently, I mean, obviously, over 100 years between them doing public service. And they worked out that they were doing about 50 odd hours a week plus 4 evenings a week every year. Every week. Every year. So if anybody deserves something, there you go. Hetty. Very different. Georgiana. Now, anybody knows Abney? Georgiana is buried at Abney Park, and that is the first place I came across her. She's born in Shoreditch. She's actually born in Holywell Place, not far from here, and she was baptised at Shoreditch Church. So, local girl, again, there is no picture of her. She's born in 1834, so probably too early generally for photographs, but she does have a career that lasts into the 1900s. She, as it says it, magician, wizard queen, and mesmerist. Now, this is the only poster I can find that actually depicts her. And she's doing, in a rather domestic situation here. So, I mean, she's a woman, come on, she's in a domestic situation. But what she's doing is what do they call it? The inexhaustible bottle trick. So there's more liquid coming out of that jug than could possibly have come out of the jug. That's what she's doing. She's appearing on stage, first of all, age 9. Her father was a magician as well. So the grandly named Bernardo Eagle, who's also buried at Abney. And that seems to have been his name, Bernardo. Anyway, so she's on stage with him at age 9, and she learns her trade. And she becomes a big star. She never plays music halls. She always plays public halls and assembly rooms. So she appears at the Royal Agricultural Hall, for example, in Islington. And she appears at the Stoke Newington Assembly Rooms in Diffo Road. And she appears a few times at Shoreditch Town Hall. So I don't know whether this is a sort of snobbery thing that she doesn't appear at music halls. But she does appear on the same bill as music hall stars. So people like Nellie Power, who I'll show you an ad shortly. Nellie Power, who's buried at Abney, has a plaque on Southgate Road. And also Fred Albert, who's buried at Abney Park, like a lot of music hall stars. She appears on the bill with both of them. So she's not averse to actually appearing on a bill with music hall people. She just doesn't appear at music halls. Maybe that was a personal choice. I don't know. So, if you can read this, here we are, February the 6th. Do I have a date for this? 1876, I think. Is that what it is? I can't read a date. No, I think it's 1876. So actually, you've got Miss Nellie Power, and then you've got this whole list of people appearing with them. And then you've got Madame Card, Mesmeric Entertainment. What she does, and Card is one of her married names. She marries 3 times. She outlives 2 of them, and then marries a man 20 years her junior. And yeah, I'll explain that in a minute. But, so she becomes Madame Card. And she's doing sort of sleight of hand standard magic tricks in the first half of her performances. Second half, she's doing hypnotism. And she also does levitation as well. Her daughter, one of her daughters actually appears on stage age 6, so it's sort of, you know, is carrying on the tradition here. But they do a levitation trick. Wouldn't you have loved to see that? Anyway, so there she is, as Madame Card, appearing with Nellie Power at the Town Hall in Shoreditch. Saturday popular entertainments. I don't know if that's expensive, cheap, or no. Anyway, so there she is there. And The reason she stayed in any sort of public eye is a story I'm not entirely sure is true. It is known in the newspapers of the time as the story of Vicky's ticker, which is why I put. Public seances were a big, big thing in the UK. There's at least a couple of people in the book. Florence Cook is especially interesting to me because she lives very locally to where I live now, and it's fascinating to know. But spiritualism played a huge role because obviously death rates in Victorian times were really high, and for a long time it was very much sort of trying to find some comfort from knowing that you could talk to your family members who have died. It happened after the wars for obvious reasons. You've lost a lot of people, and people are desperate. They really do want to be able to get some sort of connection. And, you know, it's brutal what happened. So that's sort of, people want something. So you can see why spiritualism became a bit of a thing. Queen Victoria famously absolutely devastated when her husband Albert dies. So apparently she goes in for these seances. And this watch, which does still exist, however, if you notice on here, and it's quite difficult to read from here, they've misspelled Osborne House in the Isle of Wight. So, not sure about that. And also, Georgiana did do seances. For a long time, we couldn't find any evidence of this, but apparently she did, but it wasn't a big part of her role. But, you know, somebody who's appearing on stage, if you're contacted by Queen Victoria's contacts going, would you like to come and do a private seance to get Albert to talk to Victoria? Are you going to say no? Possibly not. Anyway, so apparently this watch was given to Georgiana as a present for conducting a seance for Queen Victoria. Not sure. It's saying, I think you can find it online, but basically it was sold at an auction not that long ago, so I think it's in private hands now, but it's traceable, I think. If it's on show, I want to see it. And the special problem with doing women's history, as any of you will know if you've tried, is the fact that they change their names. So, especially when they're on stage, it seems, and sort of pull their names all together, and it becomes. So here she is appearing as Madame Gilliland Card. So she's joined up two of her ex-husbands. So she was Madame Card in the other one, but here she is being Madame Gilliland Card. And this poster is from the British Library. And the interesting thing, I use this when I talk about Abney Park, because you see down here, her second husband, Mr. Gilliland, he was a pianist, so he appears on stage with her as part of the act. And he, for some reason, calls himself Abney as a stage name. Now, they must have known Abney Park because her father is buried there. So whether that was just, I don't know. Again, I don't know. Anyway, there you go. You've got this wondrous enchantress. You've got all these lovely, apparently she does sort of Japanese juggling, which I have no idea what that is. And there's all these mesmeric entertainments and everything. So, you know, but married women, as I say, especially. So she starts off as Miss Eagle, then she becomes Madame Card, then she becomes Madame Gilliland Card, then she becomes Madame Pashley. She's buried at Abney with Gilliland, but under her last married name. So she's Georgiana Pashley in the burial records, but she's buried with the Gillilands. So it's just an idea of the sort of complications you get with people changing their names. Right, the last one I want to talk about is this lady. So this is Florence Fenwick Miller. She's one of those people, yeah, she did so much that is trying to fit this into an hour would be quite difficult. So I'm not going to try that. She's probably should be best remembered really, for she set the precedent that married women do not need to change their name. So on marriage, she became Well, she went from Miss Fenwick Miller to Mrs. Fenwick Miller. She refused to change her name. And she got into a really big fight with the London School Board, who she was working with at the time. They actually sued her, trying to get her to resign because she wouldn't change her name. She won. So she set the precedent. So any married woman who does not change her name, thank her. She set it. But she did so many. She's actually quite exhausting to read about. She was born in Stepney. The connection with Hackney is the London School Board. So she's born in Stepney to two very interesting parents, actually. Her father was a master mariner, and her mother, it was her second marriage, she actually ran a business. So her father was apparently very keen on women's education. So she grows up in a woman, a mother who's a businesswoman, a father who's very much in favour of women's education and women's rights. She's going to take a particular path, really, isn't she? And she becomes one of the first female doctors. The story goes that she goes up to Edinburgh to meet her father, who's off on shore leave, and she hears about the whole thing at Edinburgh University about women, Sophia Jex-Blake and that group, trying to be able to train as doctors. Florence, really young at the time, she qualifies, she gets this sort of licensed physician. She's not a doctor, they're still not allowed to be doctors, but at the age of 18, she is working as a midwife and a physician in, anybody know Cadogan Terrace? Victoria Park, yeah? Used to be known as Francis Terrace. It's now in Tower Hamlets, but at the time it was in Hackney. And the house is still there, 26 Cadogan Terrace. Black, hello. Her parents were so sort of successful at what they did, they actually managed to buy 3 of those houses. They lived in one and let the other 2 out. So Cadogan Terrace has got those gorgeous, gorgeous houses. They own 3 of them. But there she was, age of 18, actually serving the poor of Hackney Tower Hamlets at the time by being a midwife. It's quite extraordinary what she was actually doing. She is earning a bit of money from that, but how she mainly earns her money is through journalism. And she writes a column for the Illustrated London News for 33 years, which essentially, if you read it, it gives you the history of women's rights throughout those decades, because she's really trying to educate women. She's an educator by nature, I think. So she does a lot of public speaking. And this is how I think she becomes to the attention. At the age of 22, becomes a member of the London School Board. And as it says there, all through her 9-year service, she's the youngest on that board. And the London School Board is the first place that really allows women to be elected within London. And there's a lot of coverage later on when she becomes a sort of international suffragist. She's a friend of Susan B. Anthony in the US. And she is really lauded in the US for being a woman who is elected. She's got a sort of constituent of about 60,000 people, and she's elected 3 times. And they're really quite impressed by this, as you should be. And the legal fight over her name, as I mentioned. She's on the London School Board. She marries Frederick Ford. She refuses to take his name. Her mother apparently is not happy about this, and when she leaves her something in her will, pointedly leaves it to Florence Ford. But I don't think Florence Fenwick Miller's going to have any of that. So here she is at the town hall in Shoreditch in 1882, doing effectively a sort of political broadcast to get herself onto the school board again. And here she is again, because the London School Board isn't paid. So she still needs to earn a living. So she's doing her journalism. She eventually ends up running the paper called the Women's Signal, which is a really heavily feminist, I think, 1895 to 1899. She owns and writes for the Women's Signal. And it's really, again, educating women about what their rights are. But here she is, because she's a physician, she's got this medical medical knowledge. She's given a whole series of talks here at the town hall on public health. She was really keen to get, especially young women workers, actually knowing about their bodies, about public health, about nutrition, about bringing up babies, just so they had the knowledge. She was really against, ignorance was causing problems, and she was determined to change it. But it also earned her money, which she needed after not being paid on the London School Board. So there she is, as I say, she does her political campaigning at Shoreditch Town Hall and these public lectures. And yeah, there's a list of exhausting things that she did. So yeah, her lectures covered nutrition, bringing up babies, understanding women's bodies, fashion, public health, and warrior women. Love this. So yeah, she's a bit of a role model here. And yeah, this appearing at, should probably be quite interesting in the White House at the moment. I suspect she would not take it lying down. So she trained at the Ladies' Medical College in Bloomsbury. And then she had to, as part of that, becoming a midwife, she had to do a particular stint at a lying-in hospital, so a maternity hospital. And I think she did that in Endale Street, Covent Garden. So, yeah, she did a lot of training for someone to... Yeah. They certainly weren't badly off. It didn't leave her space to not have to work. She had to. By the way, her oldest daughter, Irene, becomes the first suffragette to be arrested in London. So like mother, like daughter. Yeah, so she's a suffragist. She never got into militancy, but Irene certainly did. And they lived just off Newington Green eventually. Is it Grosvenor Avenue? Yeah, there's a house there that they lived in. I did try to persuade English Heritage. I said, look, you get 2 for the price of 1 here.